Alright, here is my Chapter 10 project. Looking at supporting families of children with special needs. Starting with the early learning for students with disabilities. Starts off kind of sad. There's a history of cruel and inhumane treatment, thinking that people with disabilities were demonized or they were superstitious about them. So they really were not viewed in a very kind manner. In the 1800s, residential schools and asylums were created. They looked a lot like those in Europe during the 19th century. Thomas Hopkins Gallaudet started one, the first one for the school or for deaf children. But they still weren't perfect, as they avoided severely disabled students or those with multiple disabilities. Probably because they were more work. So still not perfect, but a step in the right direction. Wanting to give them a place. In the 20th century, community-based programs started to be created. This is another step in the right direction, but still not great, where they focused on just kind of entertaining kids instead of educating them. So sunshine rooms were basically just rooms with arts and crafts, and not a whole lot of rigor was involved as far as educating these students, because it was more work and that they just didn't know their capabilities. Some of the community organizations that were founded were Easter Seals, which I have a link there, but I won't click into each of them. Easter Seals was founded by Edgar Allan, who was a businessman, and he lost his son in a streetcar accident. He realized he decided to sell his business and start a children's hospital, but he realized that children with disabilities were not visible and they were often hidden from the public view. And so his start of Easter Seals brought awareness. Another one is the Joseph Kennedy Jr. Foundation. That was created by the Kennedys, which we all know who they are. Their daughter had a disability, and their foundation's belief is that persons with intellectual disabilities have the ability to live, learn, work, recreate, and worship like everyone else, but they just need assistance while doing so. So again, recognizing that these people with disabilities are still people and still capable, it just looks a little different. The Association for Retarded Citizens, or ARC, was created by a small group of parents and other concerned individuals to act as voices. So again, just supporting people with disabilities and bringing awareness. Autism Speaks was founded by Bob and Suzanne Wright in 2005, when their grandchild was diagnosed with autism, and it's the largest nonprofit science and advocacy organization that funds research. The Gordon Hartman Foundation, this is really cool. They were inspired by their daughter named Morgan, who has physical and cognitive disabilities, to create this, and they actually created the only amusement park in the world for children and adults with disabilities and their families. So really cool organizations there. Early legislation was one of the first was the Vocational Rehabilitation Act of 1973. required that no otherwise qualified handicapped individual in the United States shall solely by reason of his handicap be excluded from the participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. So basically they can't be discriminated because of their disability. This was amended in 1974, which extended coverage to all civil rights, so education, employment, health, welfare, and other social services programs. The Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990 basically just said that child care centers must serve all children. It defined discrimination, and then it brought about accessibility guidelines. Their definition of discrimination was segregation, inferior or less effective services, benefits, or activities, architectural, transportation, and communication barriers. So all of that needed to be available and accessible for people with disabilities. The Education for All Handicapped Children Act of 1975 is when we first were introduced to FAPE, which is free, appropriate public education, and the word appropriate here means suited to the disability age, maturity, and past achievements of the child and parental expectations. So it needs to be suitable for them and where they are at. In this, it was decided that they needed to be placed in the room that was most beneficial to the student, and also in their LRE, or their least restrictive environment. Recognizing that that's not always the general ed classroom. I think sometimes we think that the push is for every student to be in the gen ed classroom, but sometimes emotional disturbances or other things, it's the opposite. Their LRE is in a resource room where they have more resources to support those students. And one of the biggest things that this legislation encouraged was just collaboration while planning. It really brought about intentionality in making sure that the students' needs were being met. IDEA, which I think is something everybody nowadays knows. So IDEA was the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. It was amended in 1977, and in it was zero reject, and so all children would receive an education regardless of the severity of their disability. And one thing that was changed was the word handicapped children was changed to child with a disability, and that's something even today that we're still becoming more sensitive to, and changing our language with speaking in person first language, and recognizing that their disability doesn't define who they are, and that's something that SPED teachers and people in the special education world, and teachers alike, are becoming more and more passionate about. In this is the IEP realizing that their education needed to be specific to them, and involving the student when appropriate. And so sometimes when they're younger, it's maybe not appropriate for them to always be involved, but then definitely once they are getting older and becoming more aware of their disability, letting them have a voice in it also. In 2008, it was changed to Individuals with Disabilities Education Improvement Act, which created new regulations that are still in effect. So kind of the same thing, but just a few improvements there. And then down below is a link to the No Child Left Behind website, where there is a IDEA parent guide. There's several different categories of disabilities, pretty self-explanatory. I'm not going to go through each of one of them, but this is just the terminology that is used when speaking about people with disabilities and the disabilities that they could potentially have. Parent rights. This is something that parents become super familiar with when they find out that their child has a disability, is they become their child's biggest advocate. So with that idea lays out their rights, some of those being that public agencies must notify parents before, because consent is required before evaluation and for a child's initial SPED placement. So they can't be tested or placed into special education without consent of their parents. And this year, while student teaching, I've seen a lot of parents say no, whether it be no to medication or no to testing, or and some of that's that denial that we learned about in this chapter as well. So I didn't think that was as common, but it's definitely something I've seen and learned about this year. They can also challenge or appeal any decision related to the identification, evaluation, or educational placement. So again, they very much have a say and are aware of what's going on. We're also responsible for notifying about the removal of their child. So that's something that's exciting and something to be celebrated, is when a special ed teacher comes and says, I don't think so-and-so needs my services anymore. I think they're ready for general education, and that's also something that I've experienced this year as well. Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, which was the Buckley Amendment. FERPA, which basically is just respecting and ensuring the privacy of student ed records. So basically just keeping everything confidential. Tips for parents in this is to learn as much about your child's disability as you can, and to observe your child when they're working or playing or just doing daily activities, so that you can note their progress or regression. One of the most important things is to just recognize your child's strengths and interests, as then you can support them better as an individual. And so how does your child learn best? Do they like to play? Do they like to watch things? Do they like to hear people talk to them? And then to recognize them, and then to let them use them. And then right there is just a link to parent tips. The IEP process, which stands for an Individualized Education Plan or Program. The whole point of this is to establish goals that parents and teachers want. All children who receive special ed services have an IEP, and that IEP team consists of parents, the gen ed teacher, the SPED teacher, sometimes other teachers, counselors, administration, and then the child again when appropriate. The whole purpose of an IEP is to, it creates and encourages communication between school and home, and it resolves any differences concerning child's needs. So that's somewhere where during an IEP, it can be brought to any concerns can be brought to the table and then hopefully worked out. And then that's just everybody committing to find and gather the resources necessary for that child to receive the best services. Again, FAPE, ensuring that they have their free appropriate public education. In there, their ensured evaluation. Annually, they'll be reevaluated and goals will be set, and then they can kind of see where they're going to go from there. It's laid out how their disability affects their academics. You can consider positive behavioral intervention strategies, and parents are regularly informed because of IEPs, and then the idea of funds for student support. And then right here are just links to several different resources for parents concerning IEPs. How is it developed? What's your role in it? What is it? and then explained, and then the last one's a video on YouTube that does a great job of laying out the IEP process for parents. So the assessment process starts with evaluation, and that assessment identifies the needs, strengths, and abilities. And so looking at what is the student not getting that the student needs, what are their strengths, what are they good at, and then by recognizing the